Over the summer, finally, for the first time in a long time, many of us have been traveling again, seeing family, old favorite destinations, maybe some new favorites. A lot of us have not been in an airplane for several years. And if you listen to one another, if you listen carefully to people sharing their stories, you'll hear the different ways that we approach the adventures of travel. On one end of the spectrum could be labeled the rigid traveler. The other end could be labeled the go-with-the-flow type. You probably have a sense already of which type you are. The rigid approach to travel. We begin our journey with our e-tickets and a detailed itinerary, easily accessible on our phones. We planned our trip down to the last detail. We know what's going to happen every minute. And we'll judge our journey according to just how closely it sticks to the original plan. So a good, successful journey, a good, successful vacation of this type of traveler. We arrived at the airport 3 hours early as instructed. I have TSA pre-check clear and global entry all up to date. I'm wearing slip-on shoes, no time for laces, no checked luggage. The security people were courteous yet thorough. The plane is on time. Reservations at all hotels are correct. My weather app assured me that it'll be clear and beautiful at my destination. And it was. You get the idea. And any deviation from that, a late flight, lost baggage, bad weather, the wrong type of room at a hotel can bring to those folks great anxiety and disappointment. That's not the way it was supposed to be. That's not what I was promised. And then the go-with-the-flow approach to travel. This is when someone approaches the journey with the knowledge and expectation that surprises are going to occur. Good ones, frustrating ones. We know before we leave that occasionally trains will be late, flights will be late, canceled. Our suitcases could well end up visiting a country that's not on our itinerary without us. And contrary to the beautiful pictures on the website, our hotel might not deserve 3 of its 4 stars. But what can you do? You take it in stride. It's part of the adventure. We can be very rigid. We could be completely go with the flow. More than ever before, we're being tested as to how we approach this journey we call life. There's the more rigid part of us that expects to live out our years according to specific dreams we had and expectations as promised. With a sense that as long as I do A, B, and C, then X, Y, and Z will follow. Guaranteed, like a mathematical formula. I'll marry this type of person at this specific age. I'll get that academic degree. We'll have 3 kids spaced out 18 months apart. They will grow in great health emotionally and physically and will always act in a way that makes us proud. My parents will get to grow old together and will end their days fulfilled in all ways, slipping gently away, but only after all important words and emotions are shared. My marriage will last longer than my mortgage and will always be happy. My family and I will remain healthy and economically secure. And what disappointment when it doesn't all work out exactly to plan and on schedule. How upsetting when the expectations are so rigid. Yet there is the other part of us that's a little more open to expecting the unexpected. We hope that some or most of our dreams will be realized, but the seasoned traveler also understands that some dreams won't, or that some will turn out differently, that some will be better and some will be nightmares. It's the nature of our existence that occasionally extraordinarily good things will happen, things that are never expected and were not necessarily deserved, just as the devastatingly sad things can happen for no apparent reason, and sometimes with no warning, and certainly not because it was deserved. I bet some of us are thinking, as I know I have thought, that this in some ways seems to be a contradiction to the Judaism that many of us were taught as children and still hold on to. Weren't we somehow told that Judaism promises us that if we are good, then good things will happen to us? And if we are bad, we'll be punished. After all, the Torah seems to tell us many times that if we follow God's commandments, then God will bless us with all good things. If I follow the mitzvot, God will keep me healthy, give me a lot of children, a lot of land, a lot of crops. And if I disobey God's commandments, then I'll suffer. Seems to be a pretty straightforward deal. Almost as if obeying commandments, it's kind of like paying protection money. You make your weekly payments, you do your mitzvot, you're going to be okay. You stop paying, some big guy will come by your place and break your knuckles. But we can easily hear the many voices that will respond, but that's not the world I live in. Life doesn't always work that way. Good is not always rewarded, and bad is not always punished. Any conscious human being who's ever seen our world, certainly over these past few years, any of us could stand up and justifiably ask that fundamental question of the human soul. Why did that bad thing happen to me, to us? Was God just standing around watching the floods at Fort Myers last week? Does my God sit uncaring at the bedside of a suffering child? Some will ask, why did my beloved, who was so careful, did everything they were supposed to do, got severe COVID when they were always masked and following the rules? Since I did what was expected of me at work, then why was I fired? Doesn't make sense. Weren't we somehow promised along the way that my life will be good if I'm a good person? And oh, that I had the answers to all of those questions. I wish I could stand here before you and present a straightforward and completely satisfying logical answer. But with great humility, I can only offer some thoughts from our tradition on these ancient questions. About 2,500 years ago, a person of great literary talent and great religious and spiritual sensitivity lived in Israel. He observed the world around him, saw the pain of good people suffering, sometimes horribly, people who didn't deserve to suffer. And he saw people of questionable character thriving and living on Easy Street. And this moved him to write a philosophical treatise on the subject of how it is that such things can happen. This philosophical work is the biblical book of Job. People have long wondered who this fellow was. Many scholars believe that 2,500 years ago there already existed an ancient folk tale around a man named Job. But in this older version, older than the one that we have in the Tanakh, God tests Job's faith. God was a good man who believed, Job was a good man who believed deeply in God. And with no warning, God kills his cattle, curses him with boil, and even takes his children. In this more ancient version, everyone around him, including his wife, urged Job to forsake and curse God, but Job refuses to do so. He remains steadfast in his faith, and he does not waver. Eventually, the test ends, and he's rewarded with health, a new home, new cattle, and new children. The point of this older version of the story seems to be keep your faith in God, and no matter what, you'll be rewarded. But the author of our modern ancient version of the Bible, like many of us, wasn't satisfied with that answer. It just didn't jibe with the reality of the world that he saw around him. So with great genius and sensitivity, he worked the whole story, reworked the story into the form that we know today. In this version, there's a twist that makes the story more real. Job actually, at the end, challenges God, and he does so with great intensity and with great anger. He literally puts God on trial. There's this very dramatic scene in which Job swears his own innocence, presents his evidence. He claims that he never neglected the poor, he never stole anything, he never boasted or cheated. And he challenges God Almighty to come forward and to defend God's actions. Job wants God to either appear with some good, solid evidence or to admit that Job was right and that he suffered wrongly. And God accepts the challenge. But God's response is not one that we would expect. God's reply is quite interesting and puzzling. It's not a direct response to any of Job's questions. God doesn't even mention the specifics of Job's case. Instead, this booming voice comes forth out of the whirlwind, And in essence, this is God's answer. Where were you when I planned the earth? Tell me if you're so wise. Do you know who took its dimensions? Where were you when I held back the sea and set the boundaries, saying, to here you may come, but no further? Have you seen where the snow is stored, or visited the storehouse of the hail? Do you tell the antelope when to calve? Do you give the horse its strength? Do you show the hawk how to fly? Interesting response. And puzzling. Job wants to know why decent people suffer, and God comes back with a seemingly unrelated retort, which boils down to, who do you think you are, you mere little human being? Who are you to question the workings of the universe? That might be easier to be told that I suffered a severe financial setback because I didn't give enough tzedakah. It'd be very comforting to know that life was never arbitrary, that there are specific reasons for everything that happens. I became ill because I was unkind. A person died because they sinned terribly. Then I'd have someone to blame. That I could understand. I could blame God. I could blame myself for my sin. I could direct my anger, my hurt, my rage, my fear, my disappointment. Wouldn't it be comforting to know without a doubt that God made these things happen and did so for specific logical reasons? The world would be rational and predictable, and life would feel safer. But such is not the case. Then what might God's response to Job mean? Now, I can present to you a Jewish response, and it's not the only Jewish response, just one. Perhaps God is saying to Job, look, long ago I created the universe, but that doesn't mean you can understand its workings. It doesn't mean that I control every part of it today. I created the winds, but I don't determine exactly when they'll blow. I created the powerful forces within the depths of the earth, but I don't determine when those forces will shake the earth's crust, causing destruction. I long ago created you human beings, but I don't control the viruses and cancers that sometimes plague your bodies. I gave you humans great minds with which to create and build, but I don't control what you build or to what purposes you put your creations. So we remember perhaps the seasoned and wise traveler who knows well that it's the nature of the journey that the unexpected will occur. And those seasoned in the journey that we call life know well that the unexpected is inevitable. And perhaps they know that God does not strike us individually with illness, that God doesn't target the lives of particular children. God did not make the Holocaust happen. God doesn't orchestrate the terrorism of extremists or the many ways that we human abuse this planet. Those are either matters of nature or matters of human cruelty or abuses of the gift of free will that we've been given when we choose to ignore what is right and we choose to do what is wrong. They are perhaps matters beyond the reach of God. Many years ago, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote, "To the person who then asks, what good is God if God doesn't have the power to kill or to cure? Who needs religion if these things happen to good people and to bad people alike?" He wrote, "I would say that God may not prevent the calamity, but God gave us the strength and the perseverance to overcome it. Or else do we get these qualities that we didn't have before? The storm that devastated a town is not an act of God, even if the insurance companies find it useful to call it that. But the efforts of people to save lives, risking their own lives often for a person they don't even know, and the determination to rebuild their community after the floodwaters recede, these perhaps are godly acts. When people who were never particularly strong become strong in the face of adversity. When those who tend to think only of themselves become unselfish and heroic in an emergency. Those are the ways in which God helps when we suffer beyond the limits of our own strength. There's a prayer in our Machzor. It says, prayer invites God's presence to suffuse our spirits, to let God's will prevail in our lives. Prayer cannot bring water to parched fields, nor mend a broken bridge, nor rebuild a ruined city. But prayer can water an arid soul. Prayer can mend a broken heart and rebuild a weakened will. May it be on this Yom Kippur, this Sabbath of Sabbaths, that we grow to accept that there are mysteries of life beyond our grasp. That when the inexplicable tragedy is visited upon us, that we'll turn to God not to blame, rather we'll turn to God to find courage and faith and help to heal our bodies, to move us to restore our souls, and once again to fill those souls with joy and with hope. Amen.